Brigham City Tabernacle. A little harder to see the meeting houses. They're, of course, usually one story at the lower to the ground. But even from here, you can tell the difference and see. Well, there's the temple on the left and the tabernacle on the right. This whole thing started with a young man by the name of Joseph Smith. And this would have happened in the late 1820s. It goes back that far. This all took place on the family farm where Joseph Smith lived, who, by the way, when he started this religion, was all of about 14 years old. When he was trying to figure out what religion, what faith he wanted to follow, prayed long and hard on it, ultimately ends up as essentially refounding we know today as the LDS Mormon Church. This all took place on the family farm just north of Syracuse, New York, in a place called Palmyra. I've actually been there several times, and referee Little League football games up there. Little did I know I'd be talking about it so often during the summer months at the time that I lived in Syracuse. So Joseph Smith, some people might refer to it as a vision, but if you were a true believer in this faith, you would be of the mind that the angel Moroni did in fact visit Joseph Smith to say that you are the chosen one. We've heard your prayers, and you're going to help us uncover what is a long lost religion, kind of buried, if you will, literally, because in this case the angel Moroni told him that God and Jesus would come to him, both of them, not just one. They both come to him and give him further instructions on how to revamp this long lost religion. So what happened was they directed him to what are often referred to as the golden plates, buried on his family property. Again, little did they know. The story goes that he was able to dig those up. It was written in a very strange, heretofore unseen or unknown language. But sure enough, the angel, God, Jesus, everybody involved, gave him the tools. I've heard the phrase seer stones to help him translate what was on those plates, which essentially became the Book of Mormon in the year 1830 is when it was first published. So again, he was still just a teenager when all this was going on. Obviously, he must have been one heck of a salesman in order to convince everybody of what he had seen and heard and found. There are some that say that the plates were seen by others. Some say no, he was the only one to have seen them, which kind of calls into question the whole thing. And here we are in our society about wanting proof of everything. Of course, that's why they call it faith, ladies and gentlemen. We always don't have proof of things that we sometimes believe in. It's just our faith that carries the day. And with Joseph Smith and his followers, it was certainly no different. Now, needless to say, this was, well, first of all, the Book of Mormon and the roots of this religion really tell the story of two remaining of 10 Israeli tribes, the Nephites and the Lamanites. And Moroni, angel Moroni, was supposedly the last of the Nephites that came to Joseph Smith and told him all about this. The word Mormon is actually the name of one of the Nephite generals. And so that's where that word comes from. Again, the official title, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was actually St. Paul who had prophesied in the Bible that there would be the second coming, if you will, and that all those who believed would immediately be sent into heaven and become current day or latter day saints. And so hence the official name of the religion. Whether you call them Mormons, whether you just say LDS, matters not. Mormon is an absolutely acceptable, not politically incorrect term. More than happy to refer to them by that name. Now, as you might imagine, people that were hearing about this that chose not to necessarily buy into what Joseph Smith was saying had a combination of fear and anger over this. They actually, in many cases, would refer to the followers of this new religion and the followers of Joseph Smith as treasonists, that it would be un-American to have adopted any other new and different religion nobody had ever heard of before. And so they did face a fair bit of persecution, as you're probably familiar with. And of course, the things that bothered those non-believers more than anything else was a combination of things. One, and we spoke about this when we talked about Buffalo Bill, the Mormons would be taking an anti-slavery stance, which did not necessarily go over well in some places. And of course, their belief in the idea of polygamy was really the deal killer more than anything else. And that's really what put people off more than anything. Now, the rationale behind polygamy is that the Mormon faith does have a belief in a pre-life. Some of us, most of us, might have a belief in an afterlife, or at least the hope of an afterlife. I'm hoping there's more than what we're seeing around here on this earth, but who knows? If I find out before you, I'll send you a card and let you know. See if I find anything out for you. But they believe in a pre-life. And polygamy, you see, and multiple wives help to bring these immortal spiritual spirits into the mortal world to help do the work and to help serve the community. And so these polygamous relationships were mainly to bring more children into the world. Now that said, polygamy was outlawed in 1882. That was really the roadblock to Utah becoming a state. It wasn't until several years later that they did become a state, because they still got rid of the roadblock. Of course, in the meantime, as I alluded to back in those little towns of Wyoming, people moved away from Salt Lake so they continue their lives with multiple wives and not have the folks in the ivory tower, so to speak, right there in front of them looking at them and watching every move. To this day, I am told that Mormons who live in places beyond Salt Lake seem to have a little bit more of a liberal bent and a little bit more leeway, shall we say, than when you're close to where it all happens, right here in Salt Lake City. We've just heard that from a couple of friends of ours who said, yeah, once you get out of Salt Lake City, it's really no big thing, and there are some things that maybe we, my words, cheat a little on if you get outside of Salt Lake City. Another phrase, and sorry I keep harking back to my own religious upbringing. I haven't been very good about it lately. But you may have heard the phrase, and I've borrowed anyway, I often heard the phrase cafeteria Catholic. I'm going to go down the line, I'm going to pick the things that make sense to me and that I don't mind doing or not doing, and I'll make my own decisions about everything else. And that's kind of what happens once you leave the Salt Lake area. So, again, Palmyra, New York, they were getting a lot of heat and pressure, and they decided to all move, and all the followers moved out to a place called Kirtland, Ohio. That was just a year later, in 1831. And they hung out there for quite some time, about 10 years. But during that 10-year period, the early part of it, Joseph Smith is actually arrested and charged with treason. He's in jail, hadn't gone to trial yet. Somehow he didn't manage to escape, and when he did, they moved again. Now they moved to a place called Nauvoo, Illinois. Nauvoo, N-A-V-O-O. I think it's just your basic spelling, and as I recall, it's kind of the southern western part of Illinois. So they kept moving to escape all of this persecution and all the hassle that they were getting. Finally, in 1844, Joseph Smith says, okay, I've had enough. I'm going to turn myself in. I'm going to let this thing go to trial. I'm going to be acquitted. They'll realize that that was just a false flag, and everybody's going to live happily ever after. Well, he turned himself in. He was in the jail. The lynch mob visited the jail, took out not only Joseph Smith, but his brother Hiram. Killed them both, thinking that we take out the leader, our problems are solved. Let's fast forward to current day. We've taken out a couple of nasty leaders in our recent history, and as you probably realize, it really hasn't solved much at all. In fact, it tends to strengthen the resolve of the followers of the one who had just been killed because of his beliefs. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And so that's when Brigham Young comes into the fray in the mid-1840s. He finally realizes this little nickel and dime movement stuff, it's not enough. We got to get out of here so far and so distant that nobody will bother us. We literally have to find a place where there is nobody to bother us. And so it was that they decided to put together all their wagons, get the ox, the horses, all the livestock, the women, the children, anybody who believed, and let's start heading out of here. Now the original plan had it so that they would be leaving in the spring of 1845. Things got so bad, and by the way, we're at a little way station here. Hope y'all didn't have too much for lunch. We want to make sure we stay legal here on these scales. We'll know in a minute. So forgive the little pause in our itinerary as we make sure that we're legal. So it was in the fall of 1845 that Brigham Young said, okay, we need to get out of here, and then we're going to go about the following spring. I think I said 45 and 46, sorry. And so things got so bad that in February of 1846, of all times, they decided we can't take any more, we're going to go right now. So they were in the Midwest, making their way across the mountains in what amounted to the dead of winter, but they just couldn't take it anymore. So 3,500 followers set out behind Brigham Young that winter of 1846, finally arriving in the Salt Lake Valley, coming over the mountain, proclaiming place in July of 1847. So you can do the math, that's about a year and a half it took them to make the trek. Now, he left with 3,500 people. He arrived in the Salt Lake Valley with 147. Disease, starvation, Indian attacks, various nefarious activities from not necessarily Indians, but other criminal types. A very long, arduous, tough journey. Those that had stayed behind and said, no, we're still going to wait. We're with you, but we're going to wait till spring so that we can get a lot of the nasty stuff over with before the weather turns again on us. And those that did that did eventually catch up to Joseph Smith and the folks who had set out that early. So they arrived July 24th of 1847. July 24th continues to this day to be a state holiday. It is a very festive time of year, often referred to, and you'll hear it if you were here in July. You'd hear the phrase Pioneer Days. That's what we're talking about. If you're in this state and you hear the word pioneer, it refers to that group of people. Yes, you and I know pioneers, that anybody that put a horse on a saddle and made his way across this country and settled wherever, explored, prospected, and all that stuff. Yes, they were pioneers. We hear the phrase here, they are 95% of the time referring to the Mormon migration and the Mormon pioneers. By the way, I'll alert myself to very quickly. You're starting to catch a glimpse of the Great Salt Lake there on your right. Now, the Great Salt Lake is, of course, highly salinated. You know that. There's only one body of water that's got more salt in its content. You probably know where that is. That's the Dead Sea. The saline content in the Dead Sea is about 22-23%. Here it's about 13. As the lake dwindles, and we are experiencing a bit of drought here, it wasn't too long ago that we had heard that the Great Salt Lake could be nearly gone in 5 to 10 years. Our lifetime, if things hadn't changed. Now there have been a couple of good winters with snow, a couple of good springs with rain, and so it is holding its own. But as it evaporates, obviously the saline content then becomes higher. Of course, the saline gets evaporated right along with the water. But it does tend to increase the salinity just a little bit. For my money, you might see I see some stand-up paddleboarders. Looks like there's a little bit of a beach right here. There's not a lot of that around this lake. When I first moved to the Salt Lake City area, I had friends green with envy about how close I was to this wonderful lake. And boy, the fun you're going to have on that lake. Well, again, you might be able to float in a very salty lake. There are very few beaches. Bear Lake is a better place to go than here. If you're going to ask me where I wanted to recreate while in water, having lived in Salt Lake, I'd go to Bear Lake before I'd go 10 miles from my house to here, because of the kind of beaches they have. And when the water does recede and evaporates, what's left behind is sort of this gray, mucky, smelly mess, quite frankly. It's just not very conducive to, at least in my mind's eye, recreational activity. Again, there are one or two little bays where there's some tables and umbrellas and but you're never going to see a real beach-like environment in the Great Salt Lake. You won't see a whole lot of boating going on. You might see some sailboats, power boats. You have to be very conscious of the fact that the water is so very salty. I realize boats ply the 7 seas, and I don't know specifically, but I want to say, just by comparison, the saline content of most oceans is like in the 3 to 5% range. There's even that much. And of course, the Great Salt Lake is double, almost triple that. There is one more other body of water that was also disappearing that may be able to survive here a little bit, depending on conditions. That's the Salton Sea in California, whose saline content is about 9 to 10%. Right? So the Great Salt Lake, I don't know the exact length of it off the top of my head, but you can see it from here. It goes all the way down to Salt Lake and a little south. So there's an awful lot of it. There's an island out there in the middle of the lake called Antelope Island. You get to it by a causeway, but you can drive to it. And there's a state park out there. Somebody had asked me earlier about bison. You actually would find a bison herd out at Antelope State Park, out on the island. Not much there. If you're going to camp there, you're going to bring your own shade. There's not a tree on that island. And it's interesting from an ecological sort of point of view. By the way, with the high saline content, you would not be surprised to hear there's not a whole lot of life in that lake. What they got in that lake more than anything else, and all of it got really in that lake, are brine shrimp, for lack of a better way to put it. Now, if you're not familiar with brine shrimp, I'll take you back to your younger days on the back of your comic books where you could order those sea monkeys. That's what these really are. I think I remember I did get the to freeze dry those things or something, you add water, and sure enough, there's these little teeny tiny things wiggling around. But I remember more than anything else, and I was very disappointed when I got my sea monkeys, that when they advertised them, they showed this really shrimp-looking guy, and he's got a crown and a scepter, and it looks like, you know, and I see nothing but these little microbial things swimming around, and that's what you'll find in that lake. You might find some bugs. Around the rocks, you'll find some spiders. We do have gulls that hang around here, and they'll eat what little they can find out of the lake. There actually is an effort, I want to say it's in the summer, early fall, late summer, early fall, where they actually recruit volunteers to help with the brine shrimp count or level. I guess they take a lot of samples around the lake, try to understand, you know, what they've got in terms of anything swimming in that sample of water, extrapolate it across the lake and get an idea of what that volume of brine shrimp are like. But no, you're not going to find any real kind of fish in there by any stretch of the imagination. All right, so back to our friends Brigham and the gang.